Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show. Tony Ortega and I get together and we go over the week's events in the world of Scientology as reported on Tony's Substack. Tony, welcome back this week.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah, we got some stuff to talk about. May you live in interesting times. That's all I'm going to say. We got all kinds of interesting things going on, but the Scientology and what goes on in it is chock-a-block full of things for us to learn about. And that's how I approach this stuff. So starting off this week, we had what I really was surprised by, this guy out in Clearwater, more property now being owned by Scientology. What's this all about?
Well, the story for the last 7 or 8 years in Clearwater has been that David Miscavige has greatly increased the Church of Scientology's control over parcels of property in downtown Clearwater. I would say directly tied to how angry he was when the city did not let him get his hands on a particular small parcel in 2017.
Yeah.
At that point, he wanted some revenge. And so he had a bunch of wealthy Scientologists buy up a ton of properties. The church denied that this had anything to do with the church itself. In other words, well, individual Scientologists can buy whatever they want. But, Tracy McManus had covered this at the Tampa Bay Times. It was very clear that this was a coordinated effort and that it was all under Dave's control. But again, it was not the church actually buying properties. Well, recently, the church is continuing to buy properties. And Phil Jones brought this to my attention. Several parcels were sold to the church that are on the west side of North Fort Harrison Avenue. And that particular, farther south on that street, of course, is the famous Fort Harrison Hotel and the Flag Building. This is a little farther north. Once you get past Cleveland, there's the Clearwater Bank Building on your right as you're going north. And then beyond the Clearwater Bank Building are those funny little storefronts they put in years ago for like the Way to Happiness Foundation and Narconon and Applied Scholastics, as if these were real businesses, I think they're
Their little
basically
Potemkin village.
little Potemkin village, and I think they're basically abandoned at this point, from what Mark Bunker told me.
Yeah.
The new purchases are on the other side of the street. Basically, two locations, several parcels, and Phil knew the guy that owned them. It's a very well-known optometrist in town named Dr. Janelli, and Phil told me he'd actually talked to Janelli at one point, who said he would never sell them. Well, apparently $5.7 million was the right price for these little parcels. And I don't know, Chris, when David Miscavige is continuing to buy up properties so that he owns both sides of that street, at some point, is he going to go to them and ask them to shut down that whole area and just make it a private city? They've talked about Scientology being the first, Clearwater being the first Scientology city. And so I have to wonder if that's what he's doing, is he really doesn't want non-Scientologists around there at all. And so he's buying these properties. There was a cafe there at one time, things like that. So yeah, it's interesting that he's continuing to buy properties. And this time it was under the Flag Service Organization, the FSO. It was under Scientology. It was not, one of these wealthy individuals buying it. And so they can't deny that this wasn't the church.
Oh, that's an interesting point. And I think to myself of L. Ron Hubbard Way. They turned that into a walking street. It was Berendo, and they converted it. They repaved it. They dug up all the power poles. I was there, and would they want to do something like that in Clearwater? Of course they would, because it makes it permanently Scientology's thing. It's not a street anymore. That's just one idea, of course. But I think
another example. Example, of course, is Gold Base in Base, which is bisected by this fairly major highway.
Yep.
But Scientology owns both sides of it, and they have multiple times gone to the county board of supervisors in Riverside County and say, we want to shut that road down.
Yep.
Since they own both sides, we don't want anybody going through here, and they haven't been able to do that. It's just too important of an artery from getting from one place to another. But they
Right.
have tried, and so that's why it came to my mind that if he's buying both sides of Fort Harrison, maybe he'd like to turn that into a not just a walking zone, but a Scientologist only walking zone.
Exactly. Because that's, well, let's face, I mean, that is what L. Ron Hubbard Way turned into. It was a street that had houses you could rent. There were other non Scientology properties there. I don't think that's the case now. And it is a strategic thing. It's long term thinking. It took them years to make that happen in Los Angeles, in the middle of Hollywood. Then they haven't succeeded out at Gold Base, but probably not as important because Dave never goes there anymore.
That's a less and less
Mhm.
important place. You're right.
That's right. That's right. So, but I think what I wanted to say mostly is I think you absolutely nailed it, that it is rooted in revenge. It's you're not going to give me this little tiny thing I want. Well, then I'm going to make your life absolutely hell. And, this is cult leader 101 stuff. So, of course, David Miscavige is going to think that way. It's just a shame that this guy didn't hold out. But of course, he's not a man on a mission. And you wave millions of dollars in front of somebody. Of course, they're going to, okay, here we go. All right. Now, another story from this week, little blast from the past, but not necessarily so. Apples and trees and things like that. Gene Ingram, what do we
Yeah.
got?
So thank you to the reader that tipped me off on this. It was 9 years ago. I can't believe it's been 9 years already that we
Wow.
managed to get some information about where Eugene Ingram was hanging out these
That
days. Of
was
course,
9 years ago.
9 years
I
ago.
remember that story. It didn't feel like it was that long.
I
Jesus.
know, Chris. It's incredible.
Man.
Eugene Ingram, of course, is a legendary name in the history of Scientology. He was the chief dirty tricks guy for Scientology for 30 years, from about 1982 to 2012.
Yeah.
He was a disgraced former LAPD cop who had lost his job because he was accused of operating a house of prostitution while he was a cop, and also for alerting a drug dealer to a raid. Now, criminal prosecutions were prepared for those things, but he didn't face a criminal prosecution. But he was out of a job, and so he went to the Church of Scientology, and they used him for these really nasty things. So multiple times, what he would do, whether it was David Mayo was the target or Graham Barry or other people, he would go sniffing around and asking people and let people think he was a detective on a criminal case.
Right.
And it actually got to the point where he was wanted for impersonating a police officer in a couple states. So,
Wow.
but that was his method. He would get people thinking, oh, those people are in trouble, because that's what Scientology wanted people to think. So he was the one getting his hands dirty, right? After Snow White, they had stopped using Scientologists for those operations, and they were hiring professionals. And so that's, Ingram never was a Scientologist. I wanted nothing to do with Scientology, but he was ready to do their dirty work. And so it's a very important figure in Scientology. And he was really trying to get people in trouble. I mean, he was spreading rumors, for example, that Russell Miller had killed somebody on an assignment. Yeah,
Wow.
just crazy stuff. So anyway, we wondered whatever happened to him. Well, in 2016, we found out that he had opened the Happy Ending Cantina in Cabo San Lucas in Mexico, which was a margarita bar that catered to law enforcement. And we got some photos of him there. He posted on Facebook, and it just so happened that in that story in 2016, we had a picture of him with his son Rex Ingram, who at that point had made sergeant at the LAPD. All right, so it's 9 years later. What's going on? What's the new news, Tony? Because as far as we can tell, Gene is still serving margaritas in Cabo, right? But Rex went from the LAPD to chief of police in Caldwell, Idaho, which is a suburb of Boise. And believe me, I'm from LA, and I can tell you LAPD to Idaho is a very, very common conduit. Um, the folks of Caldwell, Idaho hired Rex Ingram. I don't know if they did their homework or not, but they have apparently had a lot of trouble since he became the chief. They've had multiple investigations about the way he spends money, multiple investigations about the way he treats people. They're facing a federal lawsuit from a woman a former police officer who said she was harassed, and I published some of the excerpts from that lawsuit that were very troubling. And very tellingly, one of the things she talked about was she was very worried about retaliation from Chief Rex, which, retaliation from the son of Gene Ingram. Yeah, right. So I don't know. I just think the people of Caldwell might have done a little more homework and thought, do we really want to hire as our chief of police the son of the most notorious dirty tricks scumbag PI in Scientology history? Well, they gambled and they lost. So, and look, if Rex loses his job, he can always go to Dave, right?
Well, it is Gene Ingram the sequel waiting to happen. I mean, yeah, it's and it's stuff like this, as well as some of the other stories you've done over the years about those private investigators out in New York who were stalking Leah, who show us that Scientology is not, they'll hire top flight security bodyguards for Miscavige, but when it comes to who does their dirty work, it's bottom of the barrel. It is the scummiest people you can imagine.
Yeah.
And literal criminals. I mean, Gene Ingram, you know what I mean, almost brought up on charges. So it is a bit of a like, well, it's not just anybody who will do that work, and that's kind of good news and bad news at the same time, I guess. But it's something worth noticing. I think I've always, the reporting on this has been consistent in the bottom of the barrel dregs of these guys who are willing to follow Ron Miscavige Sr. around with silencers on their guns, and this kind of nonsense, or that crazy stuff they got up to in New York. So um they're just kind of very telling of the company Scientology keeps. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way.
I
You know?
mean, yeah, no
Yeah.
question.
Now, this was actually a really encouraging story. In fact, I think this was one of the best ones in a while, which was the legal analysis of Scientology's scam arbitration procedures. You and I have for years railed about this, and I have ranted and raved because I have been just so upset. But what was published here?
Well, it's been quite obvious the problems that are happening in court because Scientology has found this strategy of claiming that if you signed a contract as a somebody getting services at the church, somebody working at the church, that you gave up all rights to ever sue the Church of Scientology for anything ever forever.
Yep.
And these courts are interpreting the Federal Arbitration Act in a very narrow way and agreeing with the Church of Scientology. The problem with that is that when Scientology says you have to go to arbitration, it's not the kind of independent arbitration you or I might have heard about if your roof leaks or you don't like what your doctor did and you take them to court and they go to arbitration. Where there's an independent arbitrator who hears both sides. A lot of people like arbitration because it's not public, it's private between two parties. And the arbitrator, is independent, will make a decision based on the actual evidence. That's not what's going on here. Scientology insists that because it's a church, it can create its own religious arbitration and set all the rules. And so people like Val Haney have been forced back to the people they say are their abuser, and then they can't have an attorney, they can't have a transcript. And we've seen in detail in Val Haney's case where this day after day after day, they're just being totally abusive. It's not arbitration. And there's nothing the court can do. It's just a ridiculous situation. Scientology made the IRS powerless. Now Scientology's made the courts powerless. It's just insane to watch happen. And I've had previously some bad experiences with academics that side with Scientology and don't like what I have to say about it. So it's very refreshing now to see two folks come forward. Professor Annie Smith of Arkansas, University of Arkansas, law professor, and Daniel Werner, who's a litigation attorney who's an expert in human trafficking. They have written a 59-page, heavily footnoted legal article in the Villanova Law Review that looks in general at how trafficking cases are being affected by forced arbitration, but specifically they come back to the Scientology cases again and again. And they've got it just right. They see the problems here that you can't, these contracts tie these judges' hands so that these victims have to go back to their abusers. And then the court can say nothing about what happens in that arbitration. It's just insane. And they point out that President Biden did sign a update to the Federal Arbitration Act, which exempted sexual assault and sexual harassment from forced arbitration cases. That was a wonderful victory. Gretchen Carlson was really behind that. Leah Remini spoke out on that. It was a great victory. But these professors are saying that's not enough. You also need to carve out an exception for human trafficking. And so it's very well put together, very heavily researched. And I was just very glad to see that they repeatedly cited the Valeska Paris case, Valerie Haney's case, the Garcias. They really understand what's been happening in court and how insane it is. So I don't know how much effect a piece like this is, but I think there's a lot of academics that need to pay attention to that and realize they've been on the wrong side of this issue for a while. And I hope that's the result.
Absolutely. Well, it is only through publishing that other academics are going to take this issue seriously, because that's how information is really kept and disseminated in that world. Just like if you don't get things into the medical textbooks, doctors don't know about it. I mean, just because somebody held a symposium or a workshop on it doesn't mean anything. So
Right.
that's really actually, I think, a very, very important step, and why I was so pumped about reading that story is yes, the it's kind of like the Stephen Kents, the Hugh Urbans, like, yeah, here's some people who get it and really factually break it down and footnote it.
Right.
It's a
Well,
very
and
academic thing.
also they are, they're as frustrated with the judges as we are, but they're not waiting around for the judges to figure it out. They're saying the Congress needs to change the law. If
Yes.
Congress changes the law, then these judges, especially Judge Barber in Tampa, he was really unhappy that his hands were tied. So,
Yep.
he would be happy, I'm sure, if there was some change in legislation to give Valeska and the Baxters their day in court. So that's what needs to change. Is we can't wait for judges to figure it out. We need the lawmakers to make that change and make it explicit that you can't do this to people who are victims of trafficking.
That's right. And that's exactly, I think, personally, I mean, that's the best angle to go in on, because uh, let's just say very few people agree with trafficking. It's something you can get a lot of agreement on, bipartisan, very easily, actually.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I hope that we see further action move forward on this. This is the Legal Eagle appeal I've really been begging for. So I'm really glad to see some people stepping up on that. Now, speaking of people stepping up, Mark Bunker stepped up in front of the Clearwater City Council again. What was this about?
Yeah, so we've talked, Chris, about this street that David Miscavige wants to be kind of complete his new Vatican with the LRH Hall next to the flag building, and that he withdrew that request when it became obvious the city council was going to vote against him. And since then, the state attorney general has weighed in on Scientology's side, writing a letter to the mayor of Clearwater saying, "Hey, what you're doing sounds like religious discrimination." And Ryan Cotton, the city council member in Clearwater, who's the most in favor of giving this street to Scientology, put that attorney general letter on the agenda this past week on a Wednesday night city council meeting. They usually have them on Thursday, but I think because Thursday was Juneteenth, right? So they had it
Oh,
on Wednesday night. And Mark said he was going to go. And afterwards, we talked about it. We did a little video together. And he was saying that, yeah, it's still obvious that Ryan Cotton and Mike Menino, those two city council members, are still very much in favor of Miscavige getting that street. And they're pointing at this attorney general's letter saying, "We told you so." But Mark's impression is that the other city council members, Mayor Rector, David Albritton, Lena Teixeira, are still feeling like, look, this isn't the AG's fight. This is a local land issue.
mhm.
And Tampa Bay Times followed up today with a piece saying that they are going to ask the city attorney to get a legal opinion for them. So, I mean, they're being careful, but the feeling I got was that they felt like this is not the AG's business and this Clearwater Council is going to stay firm. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, Dave's not giving up. So it'll be interesting. But thank you to Mark Bunker for going. Explain to them some things. Like my favorite point that he makes is one of the things that Attorney General told the mayor is, if you're going to sell a property to someone, and he never used the word Scientology in his letter, if you're going to sell a piece of property to someone, you can't make them promise to do other things in return. That's against
Right.
the law. What he's
Right.
talking about is that Dave has been buying up all these properties, like we were talking about earlier in the show, and just letting them rot. Right, downtown is quieter than ever, and as Mark Bunker points out, it was Miscavige that came to them and said, "Hey, we're going to develop these properties. Work with me on these other things I want." It was Scientology that proposed making those changes. So this is an attorney general who doesn't know the local situation, who clearly got an appeal. Some Scientology attorney talked to him in DeSantis or something, and so he's weighed in. But from what Mark said, it sounds like the city council is not too worried about it.
Well, that's very good news because we wondered a few weeks ago, what are they going to do with this letter? What kind of an effect is it going to have? And I'm very glad to see that the Clearwater City Council is like, yeah, fuck off. And get the city attorney's opinion. And pardon my rudeness and all that, but whatever. I am not happy with Scientology and what they're doing. And let me ask you a question. I don't know if this is in our in our sphere, but can the city council enact ordinances preventing people from buying property and just sitting on it, especially at scale like Scientology's doing? I mean, are there ways of doing something about that, just from a pure property value and use case position or something? I don't know. City viability.
Well, there's a few things they can do. I mean, one of them is obviously is zoning, and you can create zoning so that prevent somebody from putting an industrial site in the middle of a residential neighborhood, that kind of thing.
Right.
There's also blight definitions where if somebody just lets a building sit and rot and it becomes visibly, bad, that's called blight. And a city can use that to, I believe, initiate eminent domain proceedings and take over the property.
Okay.
Um, and Dave has run into that problem in various cities where he's bought these buildings for ideal orgs and just let them rot to the
Mm-hmm.
point where he was getting like fined daily in Chicago or something. And,
Philadelphia too, if I remember right.
Philadelphia was, yeah, I think maybe it was Philadelphia where he was getting
Yeah.
fined and stuff. So Dave doesn't, he's not he'll let a building rot, but cities do have some recourse there. But that's difficult too. Again, you would rather just work with the property owner and say, look, this is better for everybody. You fix up that building, you put in a tenant, they've got a business, we've got visitors, everybody's happy.
Right.
And it's just very frustrating for the city not to be able to get him to do anything. And then Dave himself is saying, look, let's do some swaps and stuff, and I'll get those properties going. Okay, well, then do it. What's the holdup? And, so the AG to say, hey, you can't make him do that. Well, nobody's making him do anything, but he was the one saying they were going to. So again, it's just more proof that the AG doesn't really know the local situation, and that the city council certainly has a long history on their side of Scientology doing everything they can to keep visitors out of that downtown.
Yep.
So I don't know. I don't think. Yeah, I think Dave is going to get his haul. I don't know that he's going to get that street. We'll have to see.
Cool. All right, cool. I was just curious because it is frustrating to watch this go on for decades and watch every generation, so to speak, kind of always giving Scientology the benefit of the doubt when they have proven long ago they deserve no such benefit of the doubt. That's all. All right. Now this was we'll Alex Barnes Ross, Scientology, and the UK police. Now
Yeah.
this was a wild one. What do we got here?
Yeah, so last month, Tom Cruise had a premiere of his the final Mission Impossible, the Final Reckoning, I think was the subtitle, and he had a premiere at Leicester Square in London, and so Alex decided to go and do a live stream, and some police walked up to him and just said, "Put your hands behind your back." I mean, that was like, they're very polite about it, but put your hands behind your back, and they cuffed him and then talked to him and searched. And they told him at that time, we got a complaint that you were planning to throw oil on Tom Cruise. And he's like, search my bag. That's ridiculous, right? So they let him go. But the new information was we got some documents from the UK police that show a little bit of more of a detail, which is interesting. So Alex was out there live streaming. Somebody called the police and said that on his live stream, Alex had spoken openly about throwing oil on Tom Cruise. So it wasn't just like some insider that had some inside information. This person was claiming that Alex was saying it publicly, which he didn't, of course. So that was interesting to know that that's why the police, did what they did. And of course, we don't have the proof of it, Chris, but it sure looks like Scientology called that in themselves because, of course, what they want is that image of Alex Barnes Ross being cuffed because now they're using it on Twitter at their Stan League website. They want to give the impression that Alex Barnes Ross is this dangerous criminal, which, of course, he was only being cuffed because Scientology called in a bogus crime. So,
Right.
just very consistent with what they do. And I made a comparison to what they accused Leah Remini of, because one of the things they just repeat forever, over and over, is that Leah Remini wasted police resources when she filed a bogus missing person report on Shelley Miscavige in 2013, which the LAPD said was unfounded. They love that word because they think that's the LAPD saying there was nothing to it. Of course, that's not true. She submitted it on a Monday. In the next couple of days, the LAPD did meet with Shelley, with Dave's attorney, in a coffee shop in West Covina. We know that thanks to the reporting of Ishar Ali. And that by the time I broke the story on Thursday that the missing person report had been made, then when other reporters called the LAPD said it was unfounded. They didn't tell them all those details, right? And to the press, they made it sound like Leah had done this frivolous thing where it had been like filed and unfounded the same day, which is not the case. But Scientology to this day, over and over and over, says Leah Remini was using the LAPD with this bogus report. There was nothing bogus about it. And now, sure looks like they have been caught wasting police resources to get Alex arrested in order to get that picture. So the shoe's on the other foot. I mean, it's just classic Scientology hypocrisy. They'll never stop saying that Leah Remini wasted police resources, even though they've been caught, we think, doing that in Alex's case.
Well, it's in alignment with Hubbard's exact specific directions on how to take people out. Right?
Yeah.
Is you get lurid crimes, I think he says, right? And if you can't find any, you make them up.
Yep.
Because it's not only for their dumbass websites, but it's also quite literally how the Office of Special Affairs staff convince themselves to keep doing what they're doing because
Yeah.
they're convinced they're dealing with
So
criminals. Because Hubbard says that.
they put that stuff out about Alex and you and me and Leah, so that when somebody, and we should talk to Joy Vila about this, but when somebody's getting exposed and written about and they're worried about it, Scientology will say, no, look, this is who that Ortega guy is. And so it gives Scientologists something to grab onto. Oh, that Alex, he's a criminal. Oh, Leah, she's. And so that's why they write that stuff up, because nobody outside Scientology takes any of it seriously.
No.
It's all, people can see that it's bogus. But for Scientologists inside Scientology, it's something for them to say, oh, okay, I see who that Ortega guy is. I see who that Remini woman is. Oh, this Alex guy. Okay, thank you. Now I know. And it's called dead agenting. They're dead agenting us. They're trying to make it so that nobody believes what we have to say. But the opposite is true. People know they're just lying about us, and it's very obvious.
That's right. Exactly right. And I just want everybody to understand out there that Scientologists really do believe this stuff. Like they go all in on it, right? And as weird as it might seem, because OSA's the ones who are setting this stuff up, they actually believe it too. And it's the only way they can keep doing what they're doing. I just happen to know that. So anyway, just as information. So Tony, thank you for that breakdown. And now rolling into our new week, any previews on what might be coming up?
As soon as I find out, I'll tell you.
Fair enough. It's going to be an interesting
summer. Things have slowed down. I can't help it.
Yeah.
Doing my best.
We'll
I
see
actually
what's
have I have some really wonderful long-term projects I'm working on. Some really, really good stuff, but it takes time. There's documents and things, and
right.
so you'll see some good stuff later this week.
Awesome. All right. Looking forward. Folks out there, of course, thank you very much for coming around and watching us go over these week's events. As you see on the screen right there is Tony's address for his Substack. Go to it, subscribe, get your daily notifications, and check back in with us on Monday for the wrap up. We will see you guys next week. Bye bye.